Warning: this article contains spoilers for Invincible Season 3's finale. I thought you'd never shut up. The Walking Dead had some brutal deaths throughout its time on TV, but 9 years after being killed off, Glenn finally got his revenge in an entirely different show. The underdog was one of the franchise's most popular characters, as Steven Yeun managed to make Glenn charming and relatable, causing audiences to fall in love with him. Sadly, he was brutally killed off, becoming arguably The Walking Dead's most haunting death. After the main survivors were rounded up by the Saviors, Negan savagely beat Glenn over the head with a baseball bat, murdering him in front of his loved ones. Despite how accustomed fans had gotten to the show's extreme violence, this scene made some Walking Dead viewers quit watching entirely, with viewership steadily declining after the Season 7 premiere. To make matters worse, Glenn never got true justice, as Jeffrey Dean Morgan's Negan went on to find redemption, and has become one of the franchise's most important survivors. Fortunately, Glenn has finally been avenged over 8 years later, albeit through an entirely different show, as both Yeun and Morgan were once again cast opposite one another in a Robert Kirkman series, and this time, Yeun came out on top. It may have taken the better part of a decade, but Steven Yeun finally got a win over his Walking Dead co-star Jeffrey Dean Morgan through Invincible. Yeun has played Mark Grayson ever since the show's first episode, with the protagonist taking on all sorts of foes. However, he faced arguably his biggest challenge yet after fighting Jeffrey Dean Morgan's conquest in Invincible Season 3's finale. The Viltrumite is one of the franchise's most powerful characters, and pushed Mark to his absolute limit, coming close to killing him on several occasions before the protagonist got the better of Conquest. The ending of their fight wasn't exactly uplifting, but it was still a relief to see Mark, Eve, and Oliver all survive the battle while taking down one of the show's most menacing threats yet. It took distractions from Oliver and a massive assist from Adam Eve, but Mark was able to defeat Conquest, using an onslaught of headbutts to put an end to the Viltrumite's reign of terror. Although the finale indicated that Conquest was still alive, Mark inflicted some serious damage on his enemy, with the villain unlikely to be the same after their confrontation. The ending of their fight wasn't exactly uplifting, but it was still a relief to see Mark, Eve, and Oliver all survive the battle while taking down one of the show's most menacing threats yet. Additionally, it was a nice moment for Walking Dead fans, as it felt like a small bit of justice for Glenn. Although Invincible has made a few references to Robert Kirkman's other hit series over the years, Yeun and Morgan's TWD and Invincible characters don't share any real connections. However, after watching Morgan's Negan ruthlessly kill Yeun's Glenn, seeing the script get flipped was satisfying. Conquest's personality does share some real similarities to Negan's, making Mark beating the villain within an inch of his life a fulfilling payoff for fans of both franchises. Although their confrontation was very different, Invincible vs. Conquest shared some clear parallels to Glenn and Negan's grisly scene in The Walking Dead. For starters, both contained plenty of bloody and gory moments. Negan beating Glenn over and over is a visual many viewers will never forget, as it was incredibly violent, even by The Walking Dead standards. But so was Mark's fight with Conquest. It was certainly less one-sided, but Conquest using Mark to kill countless civilians alongside Mark headbutting the villain repeatedly shared many of the graphic elements that made Negan killing Glenn so memorable. The overall demeanor of the characters is also similar, as Negan and Conquest both seem to enjoy tormenting the concerned underdogs of Mark and Glenn. Negan lined up survivors at his mercy and played a children's game to decide who to kill, verbally mocking those in front of him while seemingly enjoying the actual act itself. Conquest also talked to Mark throughout their entire battle and encouraged him to keep going as he was having so much fun, suggesting that despite the two confrontations playing out differently, the emotions and attitudes were largely the same. Even the circumstances of Glenn versus Negan and Mark versus Conquest have major parallels, as both heroes were grieving before going through hell all over again. Mark had just survived the traumatic Invincible War, and Rex Splod's death in Season 3's penultimate episode meant the protagonist was still in a vulnerable state. Still, he was forced into battle against his toughest foe yet, putting him in a seemingly impossible situation. Likewise, Glenn had just watched his friend die at the hands of Negan before facing the villain's wrath, but unlike Mark, he didn't get a chance to fight back. There was a surprising lack of main character casualties during Mark's fight with Conquest, but he so nearly shared the same fate as Maggie in The Walking Dead. Maggie was forced to watch as Negan killed her husband, with Glenn trying to comfort her in his dying moments. It was a brutal scene that highlighted how sadistic Negan was at his worst, and Invincible nearly recreated it. After Conquest severely injured Mark, he turned his attention to Eve, who showed up to help despite her injuries during the Invincible War. Mark helplessly watched on as the Viltrumite figured out Eve's limitations, resulting in Conquest delivering some devastating blows to the protagonist's girlfriend. He shared Maggie's despair as both characters seemingly watched their partners get murdered in front of their very eyes, but luckily for Mark, Eve survived. Her abilities allowed her to overcome her mental block and essentially resurrect herself, eventually delivering a powerful blast that wounded Conquest, allowing Mark to get the upper hand and take down the antagonist. Stephen Yeun and Jeffrey D. Morgan are among 9 Walking Dead stars to have featured in Invincible. Had it not been for Eve's incredibly powerful abilities, Mark would have ended up just like Maggie, overcome with grief after watching their loved one die at the hands of an enemy. Instead, Invincible gave Mark and Eve a much more optimistic future than Maggie received in The Walking Dead, proving that Conquest's defeat provided at least a small bit of justice for Glenn's death.